First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Babarelli and the team of Medical Nutrition Therapy for inviting me on this platform to share my case, which is very close to my heart with all of you. Why? Because this was the very first critical case that I dealt with when I was a student during my training year, and it went successful and got a lot of appreciation, and it helped me learn a lot of things, which I am going to share now. I have presented this case on various national and international platforms, and I've received very good insights with this case. So this will be a good session, inshallah. The case is managing diet progression after gastrojejunostomy due to corrosive intake. Just moving on towards the very basic introduction, what corrosive intake is, we all know what is corrosive intake. Ingestion of any kind of corrosive agent, it can be an acid or an alkali, definitely it's going to cause a problem and a damage in your inside linings. So moving on towards gastrojejunostomy. Gastrojejunostomy is actually a procedure known as Billrod 2 procedure, where gastro is stomach, jejunostomy, it comes from jejunum. So they remove the part of your stomach which whatever is damaged, and they remove your duodenum, and they attach your stomach to your jejunum. Now when they perform this procedure, as you can see in the right picture, the part of stomach has been removed, it has been attached with your jejunum, but then we have this blind part known as the bile duct, because normally what how our body is working, we receive the bile secretions for digestion and absorption in our duodenum, and there is this controlled flow rate in the duodenum. Now duodenum has been removed, and now there is this blind bile duct. What are we going to do with that? There's another procedure performed to actually manage things over here, which is known as enteroenterostomy. um, this is going to make it more clear. So they create this U-shaped link where they attach the afferent part with the efferent part of the jejunum. Now all the secretions of the bile duct are going to enter directly into your jejunum, right? So that absorption, because major absorption takes place in the duodenum. Now we do not have the duodenum for protein, carbohydrates, and fats. All these secretions are entering into your jejunum, and jejunum has a higher flow rate as compared to duodenum. Now, when this happens, we have two major surgeries over here. One is the Billroth 2, and the second is the enterostomy. We need to take care of few complications. Major complications are dumping syndrome, lactose intolerance, and fat maldigestion. Now, what dumping syndrome is, very quickly, that when we consume certain foods, because there has been a major disturbance in the enzymes as well, and then in your entire lining, the food is very quickly going to enter into your large intestine. When this happens, it is not only going to result in nutrient malabsorption, but it is also going to cause diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, dizziness. Your sugar levels drop very quickly. We have to prevent this. Second is the lactose intolerance. Your lactase enzyme is disturbed over here. And the third is fat malabsorption, again because of your enzyme disturbance. When fat malabsorption takes place, it creates a risk of steatorrhea as well. We have to cater all these problems while managing the nutrition. Moving on towards the patient's case study, it's a very basic overview. The patient, when I received her, this case was actually 1.2 years old. She came to the hospital in emergency after she had ingested a corrosive agent, and her endoscopy had revealed that she has esophageal strictures. But when such cases come to the hospitals, there is a major problem of catabolism, there is a major muscle loss which results in weight loss, and she was already underweight. When this happens, you cannot perform a surgery right away. So what doctors did, camera couldn't pass post beyond her esophagus part. So what they did is to provide her with the medications, and they attached a jejunostomy feeding tube in her jejunum, and they provided her with some time to actually gain some weight and then come back for a surgery if it's needed. So when I received her, she was on her jejunostomy feeding tube, and after 4 or 5 days, her surgery was due. And then after the surgery, we had to cater her not only nutritional requirements, but we had to help her gain some weight back, because after a surgery, again catabolism takes place and your weight drops. And the major problem here was that she was underweight. This is basic assessment data of the patient. She was a young 21 years old female, and she belonged to a village area. So when we say that she belonged to a village area, it means we had a limited access to supplies. She was admitted in the hospital in Lahore, which is a city. Everything is available, but definitely she had to go back to her home. There was a limited access to supplies. There was a language barrier. There was a lack of education. So there were a lot of issues in between that we had to cater along the way. And because the procedure was not only for a few days, we had to look after her for at least 7 to 8 weeks. And then economically, she was doing okay, but she was under a lot of stress because he had lost her father a year back. We had to cater those kind of issues as well. And because when the patient is there, you have to build a proper rapport with the family as well, which is a part of a dietitian's job. This is again just a very basic information that I've just provided. She had a corrosive intake 1.2 years back, and then a jejunostomy feeding tube was placed. These are the basic information about her procedure. I definitely will highlight one point over here, that she was kept on NPO 2 days before the surgery. She was not provided with anything to eat just 2 days before the surgery. She was on normal saline, and then her NPO was broken after the surgery on 7th post-operative day, and in between she was on IV, on normal saline, and then on albumin. And after her post-operative day, there's this proper protocol of the dumping syndrome that you have to follow, and then you have to progress from clear fluids to regular meals as per tolerance. Why I've used this word as per tolerance, I will explain later. This is a very small procedure that I'll quickly go through. It's a balloon therapy. When you have esophageal strictures, to open it up, this balloon enters into your esophagus, it dilates, and then it opens the strictures. The strictures were all right. When they performed laparotomy procedure, exploratory laparotomy, to explore what the further damage is, in the beginning, when I talked to a surgeon, he explained that we are going to perform a complete esophagectomy. What esophagectomy is: complete removal of your esophagus. They just pull up your stomach and attach directly to your pharynx. But when they explored, they found out that there is the extent of the damage is to the point that her pyloric sphincter has been damaged, and some part of the duodenum has been damaged. So they do not need to completely remove the esophagus. What they can do is to perform a gastrojejunostomy, just remove the duodenum and the pyloric sphincter. Now, as if I have said that they removed the pyloric sphincter as well. Pyloric sphincter is the part that actually controls the flow of the food as well. The food slowly enters into your duodenum from your stomach. Now, there is no pyloric sphincter as well. It increases the risk of dumping syndrome, because if food enters into your jejunum very quickly, already the flow is high, we do not take care of the diet, it is going to result in diarrhea, nutrient malabsorption, which is going to ultimately cause further weight loss. This is just a basic family history. Now, these are the anthropometrics. What we need to talk about is she was at 45 kgs. After corrosive intake, she drastically lost a lot of weight, and she was at 30 kgs. She gained back to 44 kgs in a span of 1 year, but then she lost again few kgs after the surgery. That was up to 41 kgs. We helped her gain up to 46 kgs in a period of 7 weeks while preventing all the complications and progressing her diet successfully. So her current BMI was 17.9. Moving on towards the basic measurements, talking about mid upper arm circumference and waist measurements, because definitely the weight is increased, but when we talk about muscles, they do take a lot of time. A lot of times what issue is, when specifically students are dealing or learning with such cases, they expect the measurements to increase right away. It's not possible, specifically post surgery. Muscles take a lot of time to actually grow, so there will be a very slow progression in the muscles.
Sorry for the interruption, madam.
Yes, yes.
Madam, some students are requesting you are going with too fast speaking.
Okay,
Kindly, if you can slow the speed so everyone could understand easily.
okay, 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 okay.
Thank you for understanding.
Okay, so when we talk about our mid upper arm circumference, it's the area around your arm, right? It's the muscular area. Muscles do take a lot of time to actually grow. So it is not going to be like a miracle. A lot of times students do expect, and usually people do get distressed that, oh, our patients are not, they're gaining weight but there is no change in the measurements. Measurements do take time, because this was a case, as a part of my training, so I had to cater the patient for 7 to 8 weeks. In normal conditions, when you're dealing with such patients, you're supposed to cater them for at least 6 to 7 months to actually see a major result in your measurements, right? Moving on towards the biochemical data. Now, she had normal labs before the surgery, but here are few things that I will address as per the latest guidelines of ASPEN. What ASPEN is, it is the American Society for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition, right? And then there are some guidelines that are being followed by ESPEN as well, that is ESPEN. I would definitely repeat both names, because when you're following such kind of patients, you have to follow the guidelines of ESPEN and ASPEN. It's ASPEN and ESPEN, European Society for Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism. So over here, if we see post surgery, she had dropped some values when it comes to creatinine and BUN. Now, we need to understand that these are when our body is under a lot of stress. There is inflammation in our body. Our surgery is takes place. Your body is under a lot of stress, and due to that stress and inflammation, there are certain values that you will see have dropped. There is a change in certain values, and one of them is creatinine and BUN. A lot of people know these two values linked to kidneys, but these two values usually drop after a surgery as well because of the stress your body is under. And then another value over here is albumin. Albumin, as per the latest guidelines, has been marked as an inflammatory marker as well, right? Do A lot of people do associate it with protein. It's true, but when your body is in inflammation, it easily drops to low. Sometimes, if it is, for example, over here it is to 3.3, normal value is 3.5 to 5. This is not an extreme drop. This is just because of an inflammation. If you're providing the right diet, it is going to be okay. Yes, if it further drops, the doctors or the dietitian can actually provide a prescription, and as according to the final prescription of the doctor, they do provide proper IV if it is needed. But at this point, it is completely fine. It is because of the stress body is under, and we do not need to provide them like extreme amounts of proteins over here to normalize it. Yes, we do need to provide a good diet, but we do not need to follow any extreme protocols over here. And then moving on towards the HP, due to blood loss, HP is dropped. She was provided with 2 bottles of blood, and then it came back to normal. So over here you can see the creatinine BUN dropped further to low, but it came back to normal before her discharge. And then HP was also normalized. Now, moving on towards the physical findings, these were all normal. She was just in a bit of pain after the surgery. Before surgery, she was completely fine. There was a bit of nausea because definitely she was admitted in a hospital for 4 to 5 days. She was in a jejunostomy feeding tube, and a lot of stress was going on. Otherwise, her gut was completely normal. Why I have mentioned gut? Because when we are going to a surgery specifically related to your gut, your intestine, you have to make sure that the gut is completely fine. If it is not, if there is any problem of diarrhea specifically, it is going to cause further problems post surgery as well, and you have to make sure that there is a good post surgical recovery. I am going to share some more guidelines by Aspen and Aspen as well when we move on towards the diet, but this was just a basic overview of the case. Now, another part of a dietitian's job is to take a proper history that usually is ignored. And patients do suffer because of this problem, and I have observed this a lot. We need to take proper time out to take a good history of the patient, because it's food that we're talking about. We all live for the food, we all enjoy food. You have to know what your patient likes, what your patient dislikes, what things you can add in the diet plan, what things you have to omit. For example, if your patient enjoys a burger, and if they can tolerate it, there is no problem in recommending a burger in a hospitalized patient. A lot if Yeah, but we have to make sure that there is availability to them, because for example, in this case, she belonged to a village. There was a limited access to the supplies. They had a relative's home in the city, but definitely you cannot get all the items you require from a relative's home. You have to see what is available in the hospital, again, because there is limited supplies in the hospital as well. You have to see what is available, what is not available, and then you have to make sure the what economic status the patient belongs to, because again, if you're going to provide them with something very expensive, they cannot afford it, they're not going to follow it, and you have to build that proper trust with the patient in this case over here. Moving on towards the diet she was consuming. This is a diet of the 24-hour. It means one day before, when I took her as a patient, what she was consuming one day before. This is actually from her jejunostomy feeding tube. She was consuming Ensure powdered supplement, and she was consuming apple juice. I need to mention over here that she had been provided with a diet plan 1.2 years back when she came to the hospital, but she had lost it. So because of that, she knew she had to consume Ensure because she had that box available, but she forgot rest of the things. And when I took her usual dietary intake, what she has been consuming during the entire year, it was very different from what we had expected. Miraculously, she was actually tolerating everything, but I'm going to explain what the problem was here. Number one, she was consuming box juices. When you are talking about jejunostomy feeding tube, as I have mentioned, the flow rate of jejunum is quite high. Things like juice, honey, sugar, they're considered as osmotic agents. It means they're going to attract extra water. When this happens, it is going to result in diarrhea very easily. Again, she was underweight. We had to prevent all those kind of issues. Then she was consuming raw eggs. It adds loads of bacteria, and it is going to disturb your gut. Second, she was actually blending dates in water. When we're talking about, again, jejunostomy feeding tube, there is a high risk of blockage. If she was not straining it, it would have caused blockage because of the very very thin peels of the dates. And if she was completely straining it, there was nothing but water that she was consuming. There is no nutrition in this plan that she was consuming. There is this chicken, mutton, beef broth that she was consuming. There was juice involved, milk involved, and then just blended dates and water. So there was not proper and enough nutrition that she was consuming. She needed energy to actually have a good recovery post surgery. So we had to provide her a very detailed education and knowledge. When I received her as a patient, I had to build a proper rapport, not only with her, but I had to be a friend with her family as well. They were a bit reluctant in the beginning, but by the end of the case, by the time when she was actually discharged, they were quite happy, and they um, were in contact with me through their phone the entire time during the time period when I had to cater her. So, talking about knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes, when we are dealing with such patients, they will be resistant in the beginning. Now, here comes your communication and your behavior. When I said you have to be a friend, you really have to be a friend with your patient and the family as well. Your behavior over here matters a lot. You have to spend a lot of time. I would say you have to spend more time in communicating with such patients, specifically when you have such serious cases. She was already dealing with anxiety. You have to work in a team with a team of psychologists and doctors, and when there is a knowledge deficit, which is in most cases, you have to be very patient and provide them with loads of details so they know what they're dealing with. A lot of times patients are given a prescription, whether it's of diet or anything else, and they're not guided well that why they're going to do this. If they don't know, if they are provided with a prescription, they are going to be confused, and there will be a limited following from the patient's side. They're going to stop following it after some time because they don't know what they're getting into. um, Now, moving on towards the physical activity. So, the she was obviously ambulatory before surgery. There was no physical activity. It means there was no physical activity. But after the surgery, just on third day, she was asked to start walking. Physiotherapy was started as well because they had to remove that gynostomy feeding tube, and now we had to start her diet, and she needs a proper digestion, and for that she needs some physical activity as well, and definitely for her recovery as well. Talking about medications over here, 2 days before the surgery, as I had mentioned before, that she was put on NPO, nothing per mouth. So she was given few of the medications. She was provided with one IV of the albumin, 20% normal saline, but along with that she was provided with Movicol and clean enema. These are provided to clear your intestine so there is no stool left. Why? Because if an accident happens during the surgery, it's going to release a lot of bacteria, which can risk an infections, definitely. So this was a specific thing that I talked with her surgeons about, because definitely as the dietitians, you are not aware about every procedure and every medication. And why I'm mentioning over here is because as dietitians we need to work in a team, and we need to talk. Communication over here is the key with the entire team. One day before surgery, again colonoscopy kit is to actually clear your gut, and then she was provided with some minerals. Towards the next slide, post surgery, I'd already mentioned was provided with blood transfusions, and then these are just basic medications that she was provided for proper healing. Moving on towards the nutrition diagnosis and the diet that she had been provided with. Now, we had few things in mind, because we had to prevent the complications. Her nutrient needs were very high. When it comes to surgery and catabolism, you have to provide them with loads of calories and protein, but you cannot provide it right away. You have to slowly progress it as per tolerance. And then there was unintentional weight loss. As I've already mentioned, she dropped to 41 kgs from 45 kgs after surgery as well. She was already underweight and there was malnutrition. We had to provide her a proper diet and education, so that it goes a long way. These are just that because of BMI, her nutrient needs were high and there was involuntary weight loss, so we had to provide her a good diet. Now, moving on towards the intervention, her first plan was provided for just feeding tube before over. I need to, it was all to 2000 calories, and I need to mention few things. Now, when I received her, her usual intake was honey in water, dates in water, raw eggs, juice, and ensure, right? This kind of diet she was already consuming. When look at the already following, definitely I had to change it so that she consumes better nutrients in her diet. Few things I continued with. First of all, I continued with the Ensure supplement. Now, when we talk about tolerance and specifically gynostomy feeding tube, there are a lot of supplements that are better than Ensure, specifically post surgery as well, in terms of tolerance. Ensure is a complete formula, the nutrients are not broken. And for example, in very simple words, if we talk about Isocar, Isocal is a supplement where the nutrients are easily absorbed because they're in broken form. In Ensure, it is a complete formula. Sometimes it's not very well tolerated, but because the patient, I had mentioned the term as per tolerance, the patient was already tolerating it. Sometimes you need to see beyond the protocol. If the patient is tolerating something well and you're sure about it, because I knew Ensure is an expensive supplement. If I had mentioned that no, you have to stop taking Ensure and you have to move on towards a new supplement, it was going to cause a problem, right? So what I did, instead of changing the supplement, I actually continued with the same supplement, and then moving on towards the next thing, that is juice. I have already mentioned that, oh, it's an osmotic agent, you have to you have to avoid having juices. Now here are another 2 points. Number one, again, as per tolerance, she was tolerating it. It had been 1 year since she was consuming it. I said miraculously she was tolerating things well. Number 2 point is over here, limited access to the things. Juice was the only thing, fresh juice, that in the hospital. But if I had asked her to change it to something else, they would, I was still building a trust. It was just 2 days since I had received a patient. I saw she was tolerating well, so I just asked her to continue it. Then moving on towards the next thing, I changed it. I added few things over here. You have to make certain combinations, but how I actually managed it. First of all, I asked the hospital's kitchen team to provide her with this specific meal because I knew they can, and then I guided her that this is what you're going to consume, because you cannot taste it. Sometimes the combinations you are not going to like, but because they're going in the tube, you're not tasting it. It's completely fine, but nothing raw has to be provided to the patient. I asked them to actually take 2 cups of chicken broth, add egg whites in it, and cook it in the broth. When we're talking about chicken broth, it means it was strained. There was nothing in there. It was just clear broth, no chicken pieces, no chunks, and then the 2 egg whites were cooked in it. 1/3 cup of barley porridge was also cooked in it, and then 1 teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil was added in it, and then it was completely blended. When we talk about complete blending, it is not going to leave any strains behind, so that it easily passes through, because the amount of broth is quite large. It's 500 ml. It's going to create a thin consistency, and the reason behind adding extra virgin olive oil is to increase the calories. Plus it, when we're talking about such patients, there is risk of fat malabsorption. If you usually focus on MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, that enter into the bloodstream directly, but MCTs are very expensive. Patients usually cannot afford it. Extra virgin olive oil is also expensive, but to a lesser extent. Plus there is this certain order in the MCT oils that extra virgin olive oil doesn't have. Everyone is aware of it, so it is a good alternative. You can either provide white butter or olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, or coconut oil as well, if there is a limited access to MCTs. Then the second option was that yes, you can consume an egg and milk, but again, just cook the egg in the milk and blend it well so it doesn't cause any problem, and then you repeat the options. A lot of times, students do become very ambitious and they add multiple options, but we have to see one thing over here. Patient is hospitalized, there is a limited access, they're quite worried. They're not going to prepare meals again and again, so you have to make sure that there are not a lot of different options or different variety over here, because number one, hospital is providing the food. Number two, limited access, they're not going to put loads of effort into it. Now, this plan was provided of 1950 calories. I have mentioned over here 25 ml water before and after each feed. When we are talking about the genostomy feeding tube, you have to clear the pipe well, because it can cause blockage. So you have to pass some water before the meal and some water after the meal. And then specifically with such patients, you have to guide the patient that after having a feed, do not lie down right away. It's going to cause nausea and vomiting. Do not lie down immediately. Take care of your oral hygiene, which is usually avoided and results in oral infections, because you're not consuming anything by your mouth, and everything is going in your feed. Your mouth is still there, you have a tongue, you have to take care of your teeth, right? I have seen many cases which do develop loads of oral infections because they're not taking care of it. And in a lot of cases, such as when NG tube is passed, yeah, a tube from your nose, specifically in those cases as well, what you have to do, you can actually ask such patients to gargle with some oil. It's going to lubricate your mouth well, because it is not being used properly. It is going to prevent infections. Next, moving on towards the second plan that was provided on 8th post-operative day. Her NPU was broken on 7th post-operative day. It means doctors pass some normal saline through her jejunostomy feeding tube to see this. Oh, sorry, they provided her with some liquids by her mouth to see if she was tolerating well. Usually, the protocol for jejunostomy feeding tube is the same as well. For example, if the jejunostomy feeding tube had to be continued, in this case it was removed. They usually pass the normal saline through the feeding tube to see if it is if she's tolerating. And because in this case the tube was not there, they provided her with some liquids through mouth to see if she was tolerating it well. On the 8th post-operative day, we provided her with a meal plan. The protocol is to provide a clear liquid diet. There was small amounts included just to see how she's tolerating with some time gap. It was juice and broth. Now, the third plan was provided for pureed soft diet. Normally, it is full fluid diet as the second step, but in this specific case, because the patient. All right, I hope everyone has joined again. So, we were on our third plan on 9th post-operative day. Now, what I was explaining is that usually, according to the protocol of the post surgery, we have to move on towards full liquid from clear liquid, and then you move on towards a soft diet or puree diet. But again, I am using this term as per tolerance again and again, because the patient had started her diet from her mouth. After 1 year, she was, obviously it is very difficult not to consume anything, not to taste food. So she had consumed some biscuits with a cup of tea one day prior, and she had tolerated it well. So she requested me if we can move on towards at least something from the liquids. So what I did was provided her with a pureed soft diet. It is a pureed diet, so her body or her intestine doesn't have to has to work way too much, but again, she is consuming something, she is able to taste some food. Now, over here, we have a protocol of dumping syndrome that you have to take care of. You are supposed to avoid spices, some extreme temperature foods, because these things are going to stimulate your peristalsis, resulting in diarrhea. And then you limit your lactose intake, you limit your gluten, and then very fatty, high fat amount, and then sucrose or sugary foods, because they are going to cause their osmotic agents. They are going to result in diarrhea. Fat is not tolerated well, gluten is sometimes not tolerated well, and same goes with the lactose. So you have to slowly progress from certain foods up to a regular diet. Now, when we are talking about lactose, usually you can start with yogurt, because yogurt has fermentation process. It goes through fermentation process. It has a better tolerance, and then you can slowly move up to milk, small amounts of milk. Let's say from quarter cup to half cup, and then to 1 cup if it's well tolerated. And then when we talk about gluten, you start with oats. It has soluble fiber. It tolerates well, and it is still controversial, but it has little to no gluten according to a lot of researchers. So it is comparatively tolerated well as compared to wheat and barley. And then when we talk about fats, I've already explained we have some alternatives of fats such as olive oil, coconut oil, butter. You can go on with those and then slowly progress it to a regular diet. So first option was actually some oats. I have kept the quantities to very low. It is not like extreme amounts of or regular amounts of food that you consume. It's 2 to 3 tablespoons of oats cooked in half cup of chicken broth, and then 1 ounce of chicken was added in it. Because reminding you, we are also focusing on a weight gain and providing her proper calories and protein. So we have to slowly progress with that point as well. Adding chicken is a part of it. Second was one banana mashed in 1/3 cup of yogurt. And then the third option was actually some rice, white rice with some lentils cooked in it. This is a specific amount, green lentils with a peel on. It is usually well tolerated, but only 2 to 3 tablespoons of it. Then I added very small amounts of carrot and then half egg cooked in that broth. So we can add one egg as well, but I wanted to keep the quantities to very low. And this specific meal was actually provided by the hospital's kitchen. And then we repeated the same amounts. Till here, I have not added any supplement. We were just focusing on her tolerance and slow progression, preventing her complications. Now, her calories over here are 1245, and we had to progress it to at least 1900 to 2000 calories. Her fourth plan was provided for her fourth plan was provided when she was actually discharged, and it was a soft diet. She was going home. I had to provide her with a diet that she's able to follow well. Over here, I added a new supplement that was Isocal. Isocal is a supplement that is isotonic. It is tolerated well. Now, I need to mention few things. It has MCTs. It is low in sucrose. It is lactose and gluten free. So, I have already mentioned these things, that this is a protocol of dumping syndrome as well, and a post surgical protocol as well. Loads of time it is followed. So, this supplement is well tolerated for such patients, and it provides you the calories as well that you need. The meal plan was actually a half cup of whole wheat porridge. Now, I have progressed from oats to whole wheat porridge because now she was tolerating oats well. So we can progress it. Olive oil was being continued, and then we added 1 ounce of chicken in there, so that cooked very well. So we see that. We have to continue with the consistency and the texture of the food as well. It plays a whole a lot of role when it comes to your appetite. Then the second option was actually one banana mashed in 1/3 cup of yogurt. Same option, but we added 1.5 scoop of isocal in there. That is a half serving of isocal. Complete serving is 3 scoops. And then two, again, why there is half serving, to check tolerance. And then again, the third option was rice cooked with some lentils, and then some chicken was added in there, and then some yogurt was added as well, not in the rice, but just as a separate condiment, so that she has some more variety added to her diet. And then the same option was repeated of banana and yogurt. And then we have whole wheat bread soaked in vegetable soup. We added few vegetables in here because we need fiber as well. And then there was some egg for the protein sake, and then it's a very soft diet, easily you can consume it, and we can see if she is tolerating things well, and we can add more variety or not. And then the last option is skim milk. What is skim milk? Skim milk is actually type of milk that is very low in fat. It is not that powdered milk. You actually ask the patient to use, normally a lot of such patients who are living in village areas, they have this whole milk in raw form. So you ask them to actually boil it once, cool it down. Once it cools down, there's this whole layer of fat on top. Ask them to remove it, then repeat the procedure 3 to 4 times, and then you have this low fat kind of milk available. Skim milk is available in boxes as well, but not in the villages, and it is very expensive in the cities as well. So this is how you ask them to prepare their milk. And then I added the rest of the half serving of isocal in their skim milk. This plan was provided of 1700 calories and 73 grams of protein. Now, the fifth plan was provided to her once the soft diet plan was followed for 1 week, and then, for 3 to 4 days, and then after the last plan was provided of the regular diet. Now, over here, why I decided to move on towards the regular diet. She was already following everything very well. She was putting in efforts. I'm going to explain some of her efforts later as well. But she had consumed some very high fatty foods. So she thankfully let me know that I have consumed this. I asked her loads of details about her gut health as well. She was tolerating it well. So I decided to move on towards the regular diet. She requested me to add some regular local foods in her diet so that we can move on, she can actually move on with the regular life. And I was like, okay, if she's tolerating well, we can go on with just a regular diet that she wants to have. So just like we have normal meals, I provided her with small frequent meals. One is just bread and omelette. I provided her with some options as well, such as porridge, but I added few things in there so that she's consuming a high caloric, high protein diet, such as egg was cooked in it, 1 teaspoon of butter was added in it for the calorie sake. There were some vegetables in there. Then we have a milkshake. Same skim milk was continued. Then I added, along with the banana, I added 3 dates, few almonds in there for some healthy fats and for some calories, and then 3 scoops of isocal. That is a full serving of isocal. And then towards the moving on towards the lunch, we added some fruits in there. Then we added with the normal chapati, normal local bread with a curry, so that whatever is cooked at home, she can easily consume it. And then another option was there, fries. Then we have some snacks in the evening time, just multiple options with loads of flavors and different textures, so she gains some appetite as well. And for her digestion, I guided her to add some wok in there, and then I added a cup of green tea, so that because she was already consuming such things, I added just a cup of green tea so that it helps her with the digestion. This is just a basic protocol. I'm not going through it because I've already explained the basic protocol of dumping syndrome. It was of 1900 calories and 86 grams of protein. Now, moving on towards some modifications, I have already explained this part as well, that you have to stay inclined, you have to add some physical activity, you have to follow proper meal timings. If there is not a proper gap between meals, because the last meal has not been digested well, it is going to cause nausea and vomiting. So you have to make sure the patient understands this part as well. Moving on towards nutrition education and counseling, again, there were some limitations. As I've said, there was no weight machine in her home. There was no pharmacy available in her village area. She had to go to a city area to actually check her weight, and we were continuously taking her updates about her weight as well, so she was now compliant. And again, it took some time to build a trust with her family, but it slowly became stronger, and the patient herself was compliant. And they were putting 100% efforts. She had no phone of her own. She was using her brother's phone, but she or her sister's phone, and she was continuously giving me updates. So I was thankful to her as well, because she was taking care of her and she was being compliant. In the beginning, there was lack of knowledge, and then slowly it improved. These are some of the pictures that actually she provided me with. I had asked her to keep me updated about the things she was consuming, about how the plan how she has been following the plan. So she shared loads of pictures with me, and this slide has specifically been added to actually mention one point for specifically the students. It's coordination of care. As dietitians, it is important to be to work in a team, to work as to assist the doctors, the surgeons, and to have a very good communication. I did not know the procedures when I had taken that patient. I did not know the procedures very well, and I had to understand how things are going to go. And the doctors explained me the entire procedure. They explained me everything in detail, so that I know how to cater the patient well, and I had to explain them the diet that we are going to provide and the reasons behind each and everything. So it is important to understand this point that we are not doctors. We are part of a team and we have to work together. The goals were to progress her diet, to prevent dumping syndrome, to have a healthy weight gain, to help the patient clear all the myths and fallacies, to counsel her well, include all the foods. So this was a little testimonial that she provided me with. I just had asked her to give me a little review of how her experience was, because I had to present my case in front of a panel, and she was kind enough to provide me an entire testimonial. And then this is just the basic these are just the basic things that I've already mentioned. So her weight progressed very well. Her BMI was 17.9. It progressed from 16 to 17.9. There was a 12% gain in weight in a period of 7 weeks. Again, not a huge change in the measurements, but there was a zero point 0.5 centimeter change in her waist and in her mid upper arm circumference. And then the diet was successfully progressed. These are again some pictures. These are pictures of the diet that she was consuming in hospital, and again few of the foods that she was consuming as part of a regular meal plan from her home. This is just a basic summary, and the case was a successful one, alhamdulillah. Thank you very much.